Mr. President.
The senator from Kentucky.
What we have here is a clear case of quid pro quo. If Turkey releases its hold on Sweden's membership in NATO, then Turkey gets America's F-16s. You may remember the last time we had a famous case of quid pro quo here. Boy, everybody was all up in a lather, and they said we have to impeach Donald Trump because it's a quid pro quo. Apparently, it depends on what the quid is and what the quo is. Quid pro quo, though, is actually more the norm than it is actually the exception. The speakers you've seen here today were adamantly against Turkey and adamantly against them getting the F-35 because they possess a Russian defensive weapon system that may well allow exploitation and allow Americans to become more vulnerable. But now they're adamantly for it because they got Sweden into NATO. Thank God Sweden's in NATO. We can all rest easy. Rewarding Turkey, though, with a sale of $23 billion worth of F-16 fighters, though, has some repercussions, and we should think about it before we do it. I maintained that there are deep concerns about the sale, as it was initially proposed way back in 2021, and I've maintained my opposition, given Turkey's dismal human rights accord, its unreliable behavior as a NATO ally, and its disruptive military actions in the Middle East, the Caucasus, and the Eastern Mediterranean. Congress must not serve as a rubber stamp for President Biden's side deals. The quid pro quo to expand NATO should not come at the expense of rewarding the alliance's most embarrassing member. President Biden pledged to center U.S. foreign policy on the defense of democracy and the protection of human rights. But Biden's own State Department issued a human rights report for Turkey in 2022, which identifies significant human rights issues, including arbitrary killings, suspicious deaths of persons in custody, forced disappearance, torture, arbitrary arrest, and the continued detention of tens of thousands of persons, including opposition politicians, former members of parliament, lawyers, journalists, human rights activists, and even an employee of the U.S. mission. Doesn't sound like one of our best allies. The Human Rights Foundation of Turkey, a non-governmental organization operating out of Ankara, reports that some 1,130 individuals were subjected to torture and other forms of mistreatment while in custody or at extra-custodial places, meaning not jail, some out-of-the-way place that no one can see where the torture happens. And this sadly also includes the torture of children. In March 2023, it was reported that a 14-year-old boy on his way home in southeast Turkey was stopped by the police with no justification. He was subsequently abducted and subjected to torture. The police beat him with their guns and, according to the boy's lawyer, tried to force him to say, "I am a Turk, a curse upon the Kurds." When he refused, the police instructed him to memorize the Turkish national anthem by the next day, threatening to shoot him if he failed to do so. The police then bound his hands and threw him into a swamp before local villagers, hearing his cries for help, rescued him and brought him to the hospital. The State Department's report also identifies, our State Department identifies severe restrictions on the freedom of expression and assembly in Turkey, violence and threats of violence against journalists in Turkey, increased censorship, criminal libel laws, and unfortunately much more. Since 2014, it is estimated that more than 160,000 people were investigated for insulting Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, and more than 35,000 went to trial. Imagine if it was a crime in the U.S. to criticize the president, how many people would be in jail? Of these trials, 12,881 individuals were convicted, and 3,625 people, including 10 children, were sentenced to prison. While Erdogan is imprisoning men, women, and children for insulting him, he's openly praising Hamas. So these people come to the floor and they say, "Oh, we were against giving the planes to Turkey before we were for giving them, and we don't like that Turkey gives to Hamas, but we're playing realpolitik here because we want Sweden in NATO, and whether Turkey gives money to Hamas, we're going to turn a blind eye." That, to me, is a quid pro quo not worth taking. After Hamas's brutal October 17th attack on Israel, Erdogan defiantly claimed Hamas is not a terrorist group, it's a liberation group. You think we should be sending our best weapons to a country that said after one of the worst terrorist activities in modern history, October 7th, Hamas is not a terrorist group? Should we be sending our prized F-16s to a country that says Hamas is not a terrorist group? It's a liberation group, Mujahideen, waging a battle to protect its lands and people. No, they went to a concert and killed young people. And we're going to send our weapons to them? Why? Because we made a quid pro quo. We got Sweden in NATO. So we're going to look the other way with Turkey giving money and support to Hamas. Is this the type of government we want to send our weapons to? Shouldn't the United States require countries to reflect our values before we send them billions of dollars worth of advanced weapons? Shouldn't we demand that a NATO ally in particular at least respect the rule of law and basic human rights? President Biden certainly doesn't seem to think so. The United States cannot proudly proclaim human rights to be at the center of our foreign policy while it arms a country that commits gross violations of human rights. I also remain deeply concerned about the negative strategic implications of this proposed sale, given Turkey's reckless military actions in recent years. Just last October, a U.S. F-16 shot down a Turkish combat drone in Syria that was operating dangerously close to U.S. forces. Ironically, this sale provides Turkey with 40 brand new F-16s and modernizes an existing fleet of 79. We're giving them the weapon system that we just used to shoot down their drone. Why was a Turkish drone operating so close to U.S. troops? It was targeting the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces who we have been supporting for years fighting against ISIS. Turkey views the Syrian Democrat Forces as terrorists. So in the eyes of our NATO ally, our partners in Syria are their enemy and legitimate terrorist. Does something seem a bit confusing here? They're shooting against people we consider to be our allies in the war against ISIS. They have drones up close to us that we have to shoot down their drones, and we're sending them our modern planes and updating their fleet. The American taxpayers paying to arm and train these Syrian Democratic Forces, and the Biden administration is giving Turkey advanced fighter jets that will inevitably be used to shoot and kill these same people. This utter lack of strategic foresight has unfortunately become commonplace in Washington foreign policy. This was also not the first time that U.S. forces were threatened by Turkey's reckless military actions in Syria. In November 2022, a Turkish drone strike on Syrian Democratic Forces put U.S. soldiers at significant risk, leading the Pentagon to call for immediate de-escalation. On October 2019, U.S. forces came under Turkish artillery fire, which sources claim was a deliberate effort to push American troops away from Syria's northern border. The shelling was reportedly so severe that U.S. personnel considered firing back in self-defense. This is our ally. We are sending these people F-16s who've been shooting at us and shooting at our other allies. There's also the fact that Turkey, and this is not an insignificant fact, Turkey bought the S-400 air and missile defense systems in 2019 from Russia, despite strong U.S. protests. That decision prompted the Trump administration to remove Turkey from the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter program. At that point, the leadership on the Republican and the Democrat side were opposed to the F-35 program. They've all now only switched their mind because of the quid pro quo. They've been given membership for Sweden. They salivate over making NATO bigger, and they do that in exchange for now sending these weapons to Turkey. But there are concerns that the S-400 could expose classified F-35 stealth capabilities to Russian intelligence gathering. You see, when you have missile defense, you're gathering defense on the planes flying towards you. If you own both the planes and the defense system, you can coordinate with them to learn more about the vulnerabilities of the planes that might be attacking your defense system. The same is true with the F-16. So this is strategically and militarily, one, a huge cave-in to the Turks, but it actually puts our soldiers and our pilots at risk because now we're exposing the F-16, one of their planes, to the S-400, the Russians' weapon system, and allowing the intermatch of the two, and this will inevitably put our pilots more at risk. The risk of the S-400 serving as Russian Trojan horse to compromise NATO's most advanced stealth fighter was clear to everyone in the alliance, but Turkey proceeded nevertheless. President Trump subsequently imposed sanctions on Turkey's Defense Procurement Agency, which the Biden administration has kept in place. Nobody's really reversed themselves and said Turkey's behaving and deserves a plane because they've switched course. Everybody's just saying Turkey gets what they want because Turkey used a form of extortion. You can call it quid pro quo. That sounds better than extortion. But basically, Turkey said, we're not going to let Sweden in NATO unless you give us more planes. It looks like extortion works. So this actually reinforces bad behavior. What will Turkey do the next time they want something? They'll simply act like a bad ally and hold up something we need in order to get something they want. So both the Trump and Biden administrations don't trust our supposed ally Turkey to keep the F-35 capability secure, but now we're giving them the F-16. Perhaps Congress should examine some of the ways in which Turkey has used F-16s recently. The Armenian Ministry of Defense claims that on September 29, 2020, in support of Azerbaijan's war to conquer the Nagorno-Karabakh region, a Turkish F-16 shot down an Armenian Su-25 attack aircraft in Armenian airspace. Turkey has stood closely by its Azerbaijani ally in its efforts to subjugate the region, providing combat drones, military equipment, training, and if we are to believe the Armenian government, direct combat support. So our planes that we give to the Turks, the F-16s, are actually being used in another war with Armenia. I've not heard of any debate on which side of that war we're supposed to be on, Azerbaijan or Armenia, but your weapons will be going in the middle of that war as well. The war in 2020 and Azerbaijan's subsequent military operation in 2023 killed thousands and created a humanitarian disaster, forcing more than 100,000 people to flee, more than 3/4 of the population of that region. Turkey also continues to be an unreliable ally within NATO. Not only did Turkey blackmail the alliance by delaying Sweden's NATO bid to extract concessions, the Turks continue to regularly threaten Greece, another NATO ally. In 2022, Turkish fighter jets and unmanned aerial vehicles violated Greek airspace more than 10,000 times. President Erdogan continues his hostile rhetoric, threatening to hit Athens with missile strikes and claiming that Turkish forces may land in Greece suddenly one night. Sounds like the unstable ramblings of a leader that doesn't deserve to have our most advanced fighter jets. Last August, Mesut Haki Kashin, an advisor on security and foreign policies to Erdogan, claimed, "The Mediterranean Sea belongs to us, and no one should even think about raising a sword against us there. They, Greece, Cyprus, and their allies, better not forget this." This is people banging the drums for war with another fellow NATO ally that we're sending these weapons to. Without a hint of remorse on their side, they just held us hostage over Sweden. Sweden gave in, quid pro quo, you get your jets. This statement sounds more, these statements from Turkey sound more like the bombastic threats from North Korea's dear leader than a NATO ally. Do we really think giving Turkey more fighter jets will modify their behavior? Actually, it was withholding them was the only chance of modifying their behavior. This sale will only embolden Turkey to continue its disruptive actions at the expense of American interests and regional stability. What do we get in return? Greater risk to U.S. troops in Syria, instability in the Caucasus, continued threats to Greece, the privilege of defending Sweden. While NATO is supposed to be a collective security agency, the reality is that if Sweden were ever attacked, it would be American forces doing the majority of the fighting, unless anyone truly thinks Turkish F-16s will come to their aid. The $23 billion sale is reckless. It fails to advance the security of the American people and does nothing to alter Turkey's immoral human rights record. Its unruly behavior within NATO or its irresponsible actions in the Middle East, the Caucasus, and Eastern Mediterranean. I urge my colleagues to vote in support of the joint resolution of disapproval to reject this disastrous deal.
Idaho.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent for 2 minutes, please.
Without objection.
Mr. President, fellow senators, first of all, let me say, I want the record to be absolutely clear. This is not a gift to Turkey. This is a sale to Turkey. They are going to pay for the munitions that they're going to get, the aircraft that they're going to get. As I stated when I started out, Turkey is very, very less than a desired or good ally in the current NATO framework. And certainly, as I said, we've got a long list of complaints with them. One thing I think that I would disagree with my good friend from Kentucky, the accession of Sweden and Finland to NATO was a huge, huge matter. It wasn't something that was just a parenthetical thought. It added 800 miles of direct border against Russia, which is what NATO is created to push back against. And the same thing with Sweden. Sweden has a very, very robust defense system itself. And with all due respect to my friend from Kentucky, I wouldn't put this in the vein or an argument that we're going to come to the defense of Sweden. Sweden's going to come to the defense of NATO, and in a very, very robust way. Yes, we wanted them, and yes, that's exactly why I withheld the F-16 sale and refurbishment so that we could get those two. It was extremely important. Also, as far as my good friend has reiterated some of the human rights violations that this country has, I would remind my good friend that Russia does the same thing. And I have a resolution that came out of the Foreign Relations Committee is on the floor that reiterates all those human rights and condemns Russia for those exact human rights things that my good friend reiterated. But he has a hold on that. There's one hold on that piece of legislation, and it's the senator from Kentucky, which I would respectfully request that he lift. In any event, I'm not here to defend Turkey or the other things that they do. What I am here to do is to defend the importance of NATO, the importance of adding Hungary and Sweden to NATO, and the fact that negotiations are the way these things get done. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Kentucky.
The difference between Russia and Turkey is no one's offering to sell F-16s to Russia. I'm not for selling F-16s to Russia. Neither am I for selling F-16s to Turkey. This is a clear case of quid pro quo. All of the folks who are now for it were against it just months ago. The reason they've changed their opinion is they've been given something. Turkey extorted us. Turkey said, you want Sweden to be in NATO, you have to give us these planes. So they gave up Sweden in exchange for getting the planes. Doesn't change any of the facts. The facts are this. Them having F-16s and Russian S-400s allows them to steal some of our technology, to match our technology of our fighter jets against a Russian defense system, and potentially give that to Russia. This is a problem. It's been a problem. It hasn't changed. These are the same problems that opponents of this were mentioning over and over and over again. That's why for 2 years they've been opposed to this. They have flipped. They have sold their opposition to Turkey for admission for Sweden. It's a quid pro quo. It's a trade. They made a trade, but publicly they will have to acknowledge they made a trade, and they think somehow it is more important to give these planes or sell these planes to Turkey than it is to protect the integrity of the technology of these planes against Russian military systems. Mr. President, I move to discharge S.J. Res. 60 from the Foreign Relations Committee.
The clerk will report.